Welcome to this week's episode of On Record PR, where we talk about the latest news, the strategies and insights that are most important to law firm leaders. It is Monday, April 7th. I'm Jennifer Simpson Carr, and I'm here with
Gina Rubel.
Good morning,
It's going
Gina.
to get funnier every week, by the way.
I know. We'll have to change it up soon.
Right.
So we are coming to you today to talk about some really insightful information that we learned at Legalweek. And we want to start by acknowledging that we recognize that things might feel heavy today. We recognize the market's down. We recognize that there were series of peaceful protests across the country this weekend, and that we see GCs saying online and we hear them telling us that it is not business as usual. So we want to start by recognizing that, acknowledging that, but also saying that we really value the feedback that you share with us as our listeners. And after last week, we received several inquiries from our listeners, and thank you to those who submitted feedback and questions about taking a deeper dive into Legalweek. So you will hear us talk about some of the key themes that came out of a really great session on the future of our industry from a buyer's perspective, from a technology perspective, a client perspective, and we will weave in where we can themes that relate to today's topics.
Changing industry?
Yes.
And we really do. We acknowledge that it's heavy times. We're not sure where certain things are going, but we are going to try to relate each of the themes to what's going on in the marketplace.
So there was a great session on the future of the industry. We will not specifically name the individuals. Many of the sessions were closed door. Reporters weren't allowed. They didn't allow recording. But we do want to go through some 5 key themes that came out of this that we think are really important for law firms and clients as they think about collaboration together.
So Jen, I want to start asking you, I know one of the themes was about millennial buyers and how they're prioritizing trust and transparency over price. So how are law firms redefining value to meet the expectations of the new generation of legal decision makers?
Yeah, so this one was interesting. The shift to transparency and less about price we've seen coming. And so what the panelists really talked about was outcomes being the most important. So there are millennial buyers in place. There are millennial buyers up and coming, buyers, purchasers of legal services. And it's not just about, at this point, having a big law firm brand name or being the most affordable option, coming in with the lowest hourly rate, for example. It's really important to this new generation of buyers that there is a true business relationship, that there is trust between the outside counsel and the in-house legal team. And it really revolves around outcomes. And it's interesting because one of the panelists even said, you can present to me as a law firm, you have a $3,000 hourly rate. That's fine. Are the right people doing the work, and what's the outcome that I'm going to expect as a result of paying whatever fees they are, whether it's hourly or project based? And we'll get into some of the kind of fee expectations later in the conversation. But this was a big shift, and it was really centered around building trust and providing true transparency in the relationship.
And Jen, one way that really relates to what's happening in the legal industry right now, and I want to remind everyone it's April 7th, 2025, is that these millennials and the younger generation are also the ones that law firms are recruiting. And they are speaking up about what's happening in the legal industry with the executive orders, the decisions that law firms are making. I'm not going to make this isn't a political discussion. It's just flat out, this is what they're doing. And what was interesting in one of the GC panels, the only person to speak up when they were asked about how they would evaluate DE&I happened to be someone who was of a younger generation and said, I'm still going to be looking for diversity in the at the law firm. I'm still going to be looking to see who has a seat at the table, who's doing the billable work. And that individual actually said, if a third year associate has government experience, then put them on the team and give them the work. And I expect to be paying their rate, not the senior partner's rate. So it plays right into what you're talking about trust, about that transparency, what the next generation or the current generation of buyers, as you will, the decision makers expect from law firms.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I've heard a few examples about how they're providing, how law firms are providing greater transparency. There may be client portals, there may be more structured conversations or meeting with clients. So it's interesting to hear how the firms on the session and throughout Legalweek were acknowledging that this is a change in buyer behavior and a changing expectation, and then aligning internally with what's going to meet the needs of the clients.
So in that, when you talk about portals, can you share how different firms or clients are using data to demonstrate value, build trust, or even guide strategic conversations with in-house teams or boards?
So this one was really interesting, and it's a point that spoke to the situation, one of the situations that we're currently in with executive orders. So data is really an important topic for in-house counsel right now in legal teams. And they want, again, going back to transparency, they want to see the data that supports the work that they're doing, the outcomes that they're achieving. The other piece is they are using and expecting data from the law firms to show that there is equitable access to career advancing opportunities. So one of the panelists even went as far to say, you can tell me about your diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but what I want to see is that individuals who may fall in those groups, in different groups that have, generally are underrepresented or, underserved, fall in an underserved community, are actually receiving equitable opportunities in work that is going to help advance their career within the law firm and within the legal profession.
So, with the industry under attack, we have to think about that, right? Law firms, there's a catch-22 here. So over the last 2 decades in particular, we've seen an increased push on data for DE&I reporting, getting Mansfield rule certified, all of those things. And now we have these executive orders coming down saying you can't do that, right? But we have GC saying, I still want to see it. So I think what firms have to be thinking about is getting a little bit more creative and realizing that it's less in the words and more in the acts, and actually demonstrating versus saying, versus, your pitch decks and things like that. So, because it's still expected.
The other thing that was really interesting is the idea that there are industries collaborating to create benchmarks. And so where legal departments maybe historically haven't, especially in regulated industries, highly competitive industries like pharma, they haven't collaborated in the past. There's an annual survey, it's in its 21st year, and it's Harbor Global, and they collaborate with Clock. And it is an in-house counsel survey, so purchasers of legal services. And what some of the panelists were talking about is that regulated industries are coming together and approaching the survey organizer and saying, the 10 of us would like to sponsor a deep dive survey in our industry so that we have benchmarks and we can show our boards of directors and our committees where there is opportunity for improvement, where the baseline is for our industries. So I thought that was something else that was really interesting. And, data is being shared now in a meaningful way versus being siloed. And I think that's going to force all of the law firms to improve on their processes and their data.
And that's really helpful to understand and just, I really appreciate these insights from you since I had to leave Legal Week early this year. I do understand that there's a growing call for predictive, transparent pricing instead of the traditional billable hour models. And this has been a battle the legal industry has been fighting forever. In fact, we fight this battle, Jen, as a crisis communications and PR agency that works for law firms and their clients. So what's working and what's still challenging when it comes to implementing more client-aligned pricing strategies?
So the big topic around this was that generative AI and technology is going to continue to press forward this conversation about pricing. And law firms need to be prepared and they need to be having these conversations. So the panel was talking really about fair and predictive models. And so historically, firms will say, well, our price on this will depend on variables, or it's going to depend on certain factors. And that's not working for in-house departments anymore. And I actually think this has been a trend over the last many years, because I remember my last few years in-house, we were starting to get not pressure, but requests for work that could be more easily uh, provided in a range, right? So certain phases of M&A, for example, clients were pressing us to have a range that they could expect to pay, and then they would take on, and the firm would take on some level of risk if it were under or over 10% of whatever that range was. So this was a big part of the conversation. Was technology is creating greater efficiency, it's creating opportunities to provide more strategic insight because some of the mundane work is being automated. And so how can law firms come to the table in a way that is fair, realistic, and actually predictive of what the cost will be to achieve certain outcomes?
And, Jen, I think there's got to be a caveat there because there's a really big difference between transactional work and litigation.
Yes.
And from that perspective, I think it's important to understand. I know our listeners understand the difference, but you can't always, it's like as a PR and crisis agency, we can't always predict when something's going to become a major high stakes, high profile issue. And it's going to where we may have predicted it was going to be 20 hours, it ends up being 100 because
Mhm.
and so it's very much like litigation when we do even litigation communication. So I say that because the more we can do predictable models in the transaction work, I believe the less we'll get pushback on the litigation work. But the other thing is, given what's happening in the industry, we've also been told by GCs that they're going to start taking their litigation from certain firms that have made certain decisions to other ones that are standing for the rule of law. So while I don't think that's going to play out in big ways in the immediate future, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the long haul.
The other piece this brings up, and it's our fifth point that we'll get to, but part of these kind of this growing demand for transparency and for more predictable pricing it is starting to force firms to incorporate pricing professionals and business development professionals into these conversations where
But Jen, I have to stop you because pricing has nothing to do with marketing. We've heard that over and over and over again from executive committees. And our legal marketing colleagues have heard the same, but isn't pricing one of the key elements of marketing and business development?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear. It was interesting to hear the conversation around this, which is for the buyers, right? This new generation, they're happy to have individuals at the table and in these strategic conversations who are not lawyers. And I will say, I didn't say non-lawyers, right? Because you are one of the biggest advocates for that. But business professionals who provide expertise in other ways in the legal community, such as pricing, business development, and these other strategic conversations.
And I just want to say this to the lawyers that are listening. I am one of you. And there is a reason why these business professionals need a seat at that table. We really do understand we're talking to the clients. And when I say we, it's because I'm part of the legal marketing community overall. But your CMOs, your CMBDOs, your client relationship managers, they really do understand what the client wants as it relates to pricing. So I implore you, please give them a seat at the table and understand that this is a business industry and the business of law has changed. So, Jen, we're talking about the legal profession and how it's expanding beyond just people with JDs, people who've gone to law school, AKA lawyers. How are forward-thinking firms building multidisciplinary teams, and what new roles do you see shaping the future of legal service delivery?
Yeah, so it goes back to what we were just talking about. And it's interesting that, again, the buyers are welcome conversations and welcome individuals into these meetings who do not hold a JD, who are not attorneys, but who are business professionals with expertise in other areas. And so a lot of the conversation evolved around exactly that, which was multidisciplinary teams. So as you're thinking about pricing, as you're thinking about discussing with your general counsel and your legal department what outcomes might be, having a multidisciplinary team as part of that conversation provides a level of diversity of perspective and expertise that one or two individuals who are focused on the practice of law may not be able to bring. And so really what you're doing is you're demonstrating to your clients in this way that you have experts around the firm that you can tap into in key areas that your clients care about. And one of them being pricing and another being expected, you can't guarantee outcomes, but what outcomes might I be able to expect in this scenario?
Jen, I remember having a conversation with Catherine Zinn, and she has a seat at the table and she meets with the clients, and so many people are like, what, your firm lets you do that? And here they are having her create the relationships with the clients and then be that go-to, similar to what you do at Fury Rubel. And I remember talking to her, now this is going back, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and how that was so important, yet we still have so many firms who haven't done that. So I just want to reiterate the importance and that there are firms out there and call out, hi, Catherine.
And can I just pick up on something you said earlier, because it struck a chord with me. And if you're listening and you currently call your professional employees staff, or you call them non-attorneys, the last law firm I worked at, I'll give them a shout out, Lowenstein, we were called BSG, Business Services Group. And I will tell you, it was a really proud place to work because people used language that honored the expertise and the professional insight that we had as individuals who are not practicing law. And so if you're listening and you feel like it's a big undertaking to kind of change that narrative internally, it's really not. It's changing the narrative from whatever it is to our business services team or a legal operations team or whatever that language palette is that honors and respects the individuals who are providing great expertise internally but aren't practicing law.
It's interesting, Jen, because I have been trying to every way, shape, or form work with the American Bar Association to change the language in the model rules to get rid of the word non-lawyer. And I can tell you Heather Morse has been doing it, and I mean there's so many people who just Jasmine Trios to carry, like so many of us just despise that word. And as a lawyer who served on an ethics committee for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court Disciplinary Board, I understand why it's one word versus a few words, right? And in an industry where, we as lawyers tend to be verbose, And I don't say that in a bad way. We just have to explain things. That's how we're taught in law school. Having a single word for a phrase seems easier. And unfortunately, with the state of the industry right now and everything the ABA is fighting for the rule of law, I think that's going to be put on a back burner, but we can continue to have this grassroots effort of talking to business professionals and lawyers and saying, let's use language that is inclusive of the expertise that people bring to the table. So I just want to say that because now it seems like a battle that is far, far away, given all the
Yes,
other battles we have to fight.
that is true.
I feel like I'm talking about Shrek here, far, far away. So anyway, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I know we're going to be out of time. So we know that talent retention remains one of the biggest challenges for firms, especially with mid-level associate attrition, and now with the challenges to the rule of law in the industry. So what practical steps can firms take to address what some call the million-dollar problem of associate turnover? Sorry about that.
This was really eye-opening for me. And I know when we shared notes with our clients, because we do that, right? As their strategic partners, we share these recaps when they can't be at the conferences where we are. But what we learned in that panel is that they call this the $1 million problem because when a third year associate leaves a firm in the AmLaw 200, it costs $1 million. It costs the firm $1 million between training, client continuity, leadership, recruiting and offboarding and then recruiting to fill the spot. So this is a huge problem and it's a costly problem. So firms need to start being more intentional about how they allocate work. We talked earlier about data and how you can really review the billable hour just to see where work is being distributed and how more sophisticated work or work that sets you up for career advancement is being distributed. But also there is this movement to stop what the panelists called hallway staffing, which is the person next to you, the person across the hall. I know it's changed with COVID and kind of this hybrid work model, but the people that you've developed these close relationships with because you're in close proximity. And to really start thinking as partners and other legal professionals who are assigning the work, being intentional about who it is that you're assigning it to and ensuring that you're providing these opportunities beyond just those few people who may sit near you or you may have the most FaceTime with on Teams or Zoom. And I thought that was really insightful. And it was, again, a call to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that didn't need a formal program. It was a way that all of the individuals assigning work could do it in their day-to-day lives.
But you know what, Jen? I think there's got to be some sort of study with actual data as to the loss of profits per partner because of associate attrition, so that the bully attorneys, the bully lawyers, those partners who are big rainmakers and honestly don't care about how they treat other people. And there are those people, let's face it. We all know them. It's not the majority of the industry by any means. But those are some of the people that push out some of the best talent. And if they actually saw how it affected their profits per partner, their bottom line, maybe they would learn to be a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more, provide more mentoring and not say, well, this is the way I was treated. This is what I had to do to get here. Because frankly, what I had to do to get where I am is a lot different than you, and it's going to be a lot different than the next generation. And that's life. That's called evolution.
Sure. And to kind of take that a step further, I completely agree with you. And these are individuals who need to invest in coaching this younger generation, in providing feedback, in providing early exposure to clients. We hear in associate surveys, the results of associate surveys, you and I hear and our team hears anecdotally that associates are really hungry for that mentoring and the career opportunities. And so that's even more so than salary, we're hearing, that's how they're going to evaluate whether or not they stay and whether or not they choose their next place of employment.
Well, before we close, I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
Because for the associates listening, that also means you have to get face time. And this is what senior attorneys are saying. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You want to be mentored, you want to have opportunities, but you want to stay home and work 5 days a week. And look, we are fully virtual. We have found ways to mentor our younger members through, I mean, we live on Teams, right? And we live on Slack, and we're constantly communicating, and it's not easy and it takes extra time. But I think the associates need to understand you have to find ways to make yourself available to those attorneys too. It's not a one-way street. And I know that the more senior attorneys listening to this are going to go, well, yeah, they want to work from home all the time, but they also want all these opportunities. And there's not an easy fix there. And I want to acknowledge that. I think it's important because there are, as I like to say, 3 sides to every story. So if you look at a coin, right? If you look at a quarter, you have heads, you have tails, and then you have the side you roll it on. And that's the side that we're always trying to come to here at Furia Rubel with our team. Like, nobody's right or wrong. It's where do we get the best results to, I mean, I know what it costs us when we have attrition. And so it starts at the day one of interview all the way through the way you treat your team players during their relationship with your organization. With that, I'm going to ask you to close it out. I think we've gone a little bit longer than we usually do, so I want to be mindful of time.
Great. Well, thank you for this great conversation, and thank you to our listeners. Again, we truly value and appreciate your feedback. If you have topic ideas, if you have questions, please email us at podcast@onrecordpr.com. If you have enjoyed this episode and you enjoy our show, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. It does help when people are searching for our content, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Jen. Bye, everyone.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com. On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.